everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, joined by Ken Weeb from Sportsnet. Together, we are Kenny and Renny, and this is our long-form Thursday Kenny and Renny show. We love this one. We get to spend time with some of the titans of the industry, and today is going to be no different as we are going to welcome in about 5 minutes from now, Katie Strang from The Athletic. Clearly, we want to talk about, what has been, the biggest story in hockey for a number of weeks now, and really kind of took over the conversation here in Winnipeg this week as we waited to hear from Kevin Cheveldayoff on Tuesday. We last week we wanted to take care of this. We had Frank Saravalli on, had a conversation I was really proud of that we had, and I thought that we provided a lot of space for conversation, and as you always do in the chat room, joined in and took care of that. And I thought on our last Kenny and Renny post game show, Ken, on Tuesday night, I thought we had some very interesting conversations, both on the show and in the chat room, and those continued afterwards. I had said I was open to having conversations with people from the chat room personally if they wanted to reach out. A few of you had those conversations, and again, I want to reiterate what I did on Tuesday was just how proud I am of, I know, and Ken, we know this is a heated issue. We know that emotions are running high, and we understand why emotions are running high. But I would just want to say that, with high emotions can come, some pretty nasty conversations for the most part. We've avoided that, and I think that the conversations we've had have been a lot more constructive because of that. And I'd like to keep that theme going, and we're going to try and keep that going today with Katie Strang. We want to next week kind of resume what we have typically done in this space on the Thursdays, a little bit on Fridays last week, which is to kind of, bring these titans of the industry on and not only talk issues, but also kind of dig into more the personalities, behind who the people that we are talking to are. We feel that this topic and Kyle Beach's story deserves undivided attention, though, which is why last week we decided to go in that direction and throw everything we had into that. And this week we're going to do the very same thing. We wanted to make sure we gave it a couple days after we heard from Mark Chipman, Kevin Cheveldayoff, and kind of try and have one last conversation about this. Not that we can't talk about this going forward. We wanted to dedicate one last show to this entire issue, and that's what we plan to do here today. And that's what we're going to do here today. Can't wait to talk to Katie, a former colleague of Ken Weeb's. But Ken, how are you doing today, my friend?
Doing great, Sean. Thanks. Thanks for the intro. I'm glad that some of those other conversations were continuing, and as you mentioned, it's important that we keep the conversation moving forward here. This is an important topic. It's not just going to go away. It's not just part of the 24-hour spin cycle, and we've talked a lot about the words hockey culture in this last stretch of time, and it's essential and integral that that culture is improved and brought to a better place. And that's one of the reasons we are welcoming Katie Strang, a person that I'm proud to call a friend and a colleague, and can't wait for her insight because she's done some incredible work on this subject. And let's welcome her in. I think she's ready to go here.
Yeah, has she ever? We're going to bring her in. I've never met Katie before, so I'd like to introduce myself. Katie, I'm Sean. I know that you and Ken are former colleagues. I've stolen him away. He's mine now. Don't be trying to steal him back. But just welcome to the show, Katie. And I think I'd like to, I watched your interview with Ron McLean, and there's a couple things in there that stood out to me. But what I liked about the way he started that was you've done phenomenal work on this, and he kind of just gave you the floor to kind of start out and lead the direction on the conversation. You've been leading on this for a long time. I'd like to continue that, and just your thoughts on where we are today after weeks of this and kind of things coming to a head, especially here in Winnipeg on Tuesday.
Yeah, I'll kind of start with what I said to Ron, which is just like the thing that I keep coming back to is just like how difficult it is to wrap your head around the fact that so many people failed Kyle Beach. I was thinking about that yesterday, just as I was actually kind of processing the Jets press conference of, how is it that like really no one, just send them a life draft, like no one reached out to just, even if they were worried about potentially like compromising the integrity of an investigation or his privacy or what, like it just didn't feel like there were enough people just saying like, hey, are you okay? And it just, I mean, it's sort of stunning in its simplicity, but I mean, it really matters. Like, I think a vibrant, healthy National Hockey League is one that like thinks of its players as human beings first, and that comes before hockey. And it just so clearly wasn't the case here.
Yeah, this is something that we can't just wave a magic wand, Katie, and make it all go to the place where everyone wants it to get to. But what are the next steps in trying to, foster a better hockey culture where these sorts of issues are not at the forefront and people aren't, not afraid or are put in a better position to move forward and, take some steps forward into creating a safer environment for all people, not just players, but employees and everyone who's in that world?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've heard a lot of discussion lately about, empowered bystanders. And I think that's, something that's really critical to remember that, we want to, there's clearly been some institutional and systemic failures. We want to empower and embolden the individuals to be able to feel comfortable to say and speak up and say, hey, this isn't right, or hey, I'm noticing this seems a little bit off, or I want to escalate concerns about such and such behavior. And I think what has been frustrating as we've been sort of like wading through some of the, not minutia, but the details and trying to dissect, okay, this person knew this at this point in time, but their responsibilities were this, and sort of trying to evaluate based on those things. It really, to me, runs counterintuitive to this fundamental idea of it shouldn't matter where you are on the hierarchy of an organization. It shouldn't really matter specifically what is within your purview. Like none of those things should inhibit you from acting like a human being and acting in the interest of protecting other human beings in your organization. Like I think I would really like to see more emotional investment or investment in any way, into like the safety and well-being of a positive and healthy like workplace environment.
Katie, to the point that you're just talking about, those who knew and the varying degrees or levels of what they knew, what questions should they have been asking themselves after that meeting? I know a lot of them are saying they felt that this was going to be taken care of by the bosses ahead of them, but what questions should the men who were in that meeting, regardless of how much they knew from that meeting, what questions should they have been asking themselves, especially in those following weeks, those crucial following weeks when Brad Aldridge remained with the team throughout the Stanley Cup final, remained in that room where those players that he had, attempted to take advantage of and had taken advantage of were in?
I mean, the questions that I would be asking are, first and foremost, is Kyle Beach okay? Does Kyle Beach have what he needs in terms of institutional and organizational support? Does he have resources at his disposal if he needs it? Does he know that we are here for him and taking this seriously? Do we need to talk to other people within our organization who have intersected with Brad in a professional capacity to see if they've been exposed to any of these behaviors? Are our processes that we have in place to sort of identify some of this behavior strong enough? Are they robust? Are they credible and reliable for us to feel like we can appropriately handle these situations? I mean, like, there's a time, I mean, those are like 10 right off the bat that I would like start with. And there's just, a cascade of questions that I think happen from there. And I mean, I'm glad that you're asking about like, what questions should you ask? And this is hard for me. Like, I'm an investigative reporter. So I am sort of like by nature, I'm nosy. All reporters are, right? Like I want to know everything. And it's it's my job to be nosy and to ask questions. But like it's driven by a true like curiosity. And I guess like one of the things that's lacking to me in this situation, besides like a level of humanity, is like a level of curiosity. I understand that it was during the playoffs, but like I put myself in that meeting and I feel like I'd be like, I got a lot more questions to be asking here. There's a lot more I want to know about this situation. And not just like just for prurient like curiosity or just like to be voyeuristic, but I mean truly like in the sake of protecting our entire organization, there's a lot of questions I'd be wanting to ask. And I just like it doesn't feel like there was any level of like curiosity or desire to learn more. And I don't know why that is.
For sure. Katie, when it comes to Kyle, obviously, in speaking with so many victims as you have over the years, I mean, can you tell us a little bit of what goes into the process of what would make a person finally feel comfortable to come forward and fostering the relationships required to be able to tell a story of that significant magnitude?
I mean, you certainly have to have just a truly really high level of trust in the person telling that story. And so, you know, that is a testament and a credit to Rick Westhead, who, you know, has been absolutely superlative in reporting this story. Like, we would not be here. We would not be having these conversations. None of this would have come out if it weren't for Rick's doggedness, his relentlessness, his just refusal to, you know, stop pursuing this story in like the pursuit of the truth. And I'm sure that that's resonated for all of us. Like, I'm really proud to be, you know, a colleague in this industry of Rick and a friend of his. And I bet that resonated with Kyle. I bet he saw how hard, you know, Rick was busting his ass and really like holding people accountable. And so, you know, in just having that level of rapport with a reporter, I think is really important when you're sharing something very painful and private and traumatic and, you know, fraught with grief. And, you know, I think another thing that I'm sure has helped him, and he did reference this in the interview last week, is having a really strong support system. Like, he's mentioned his girlfriend several times. And, you know, I certainly think having Paul Vincent being willing to step up on his behalf, and there were a few players that we've talked to and that Rick has talked to that were also, you know, corroborating what he had said. And I think that helps. Like, and that goes to show you, like, when we talk about bystanders, there are so many different ways bystanders can have impacts. And like, I think people are really kind of scared about approaching situations that are as sensitive as this because they're afraid to say the wrong thing. And I can appreciate that. But I think a lot of times it is not what you say, but like if you're just willing to be there to listen, people pick up on that, and people can tell like when you're genuine and authentic and sincere. So even if you do screw up a little bit and say something kind of stupid, like they're not going to hold it against you because they can like tell what's in your heart, and like if you're trying to be there for them. And so I do think that there were people along the way, not really people in positions of power necessarily, but like, you know, people that were willing to say, you know, we're going to corroborate what you said. Like, we're willing to stand behind you. And that makes a big difference.
Katie, you talked about, you know, Rick's doggedness and pushing for this. You were a part of this and digging into this. How difficult was it to get to the truth in this situation?
I mean, hard. I mean, this is a difficult thing to talk about in general. And I do a lot of reporting on this subject. And then you add in the institutional protectionism angle, and then it gets quite a bit harder. I think there were a lot of us who were very skeptical that we'd ever get the level of transparency that the Jenner and Block report actually provided. So that was a pleasant surprise on my part. But, you know, like, I think hockey really values and prioritizes stoicism and, like, you know, playing through pain and this idea of omerta and, like, you know, kind of keeping what's within the room. And those can be sort of impenetrable barriers at times. So you got to just like really work hard at chipping away. And that was difficult with this story. But, you know, I think that courage can be really contagious. And so I think I think you're seeing that now with Kyle coming forward publicly last week, and how much of a game changer that was, just even in the discourse. I think when he was willing to, do something that courageous and that truly vulnerable, I think that resonated with people. I think that impacted people in a very visceral way.
For me, Katie, I mean, the fact that Jets mentioned Sheldon Kennedy was welcome news, especially after it was sort of dismissed on the NHL call. I mean, what were your thoughts on that subject, and how important would it be for Sheldon to play a role not only with the Jets but throughout the league moving forward?
I mean, yes, like he's such a wonderful beacon of light throughout all of this, and it's a credit and a testament to Sheldon that he's fought as hard and just as sort of he's been unwavering in his commitment to this issue, despite the fact that there's Sheldon's not free of trauma now just because he's far removed from it. Sheldon has to deal with like the echoes of trauma and pain every day of his life, I'm sure. And Jeff Merrick said this a few days ago in his 32 Thoughts podcast with Elliot Friedman. I love this. And he was like, man, I love Sheldon Kennedy because that guy, like, no matter what happens, like, he just stays in the batter's box. Like, he refuses to get out even when he keeps getting, like, no matter how many times he's gotten hit by a pitch or betrayed by people or let down, he just keeps coming back, and with a smile on his face and a level of determination. And that's like, I think that to me, like, really embodies who Sheldon is and how important this is and why he's been such a good sort of surrogate and advocate in this space. I was happy that the Jets brought him up. To me, it was clear that Mark Chipman not only had a personal connection to this, and I appreciated that he shared that, but it was also clear to me that he educated himself and took some proactive steps to do so. I appreciated that, he cited the, World Health Organization statistics. I'm really appreciative of the fact that he cited, that according to 1 in 6, the organization, that 1 in 6 males will endure sexual harassment or abuse at one point in their life. I think people do not realize how pervasive and how common it is for men to be victims of sexual abuse and the shame and stigma that surrounds that. So I think I was really happy that he acknowledged that.
Katie, I referenced that interview you had with Ron McLean earlier. There was something that you talked about that really resonated with me when you talked about character and how often we reference it in hockey. We talk about hockey culture, and I think, hockey purists will say character is such a big part of hockey culture, and that comes with the stoicism that you're talking about, and the quietness and leaving it in the room, and the omerta, all those kind of things are said to happen with honor. But it's clear that this not talking about things can often have dire consequences. And I guess I wonder this, we talk about, if you take a look at the pyramid of hockey, the people who are at the very top, and then the people coming to the league, the players at the bottom, the people at the top are highly demanding of players and people entering the hockey world of having character, showing character. But how do we get to the point where we demand character in the decisions of the people at the top of the hockey pyramid?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like that's been kind of absent from the conversation of like, what do we expect of our leaders? And I mean, that's not just like GMs or, executives for teams. That's right all the way up to the very top. In Gary Bettman, in Don Fear, and, I said this last night, I think both men are brilliant lawyers. I think they're both very shrewd businessmen, but, they both had different, but they failed in some ways. Like, obviously Gary Bettman's press conference left a whole lot to be desired from a human angle, and Don Fear obviously let Kyle Beach down with his inaction 11 years ago or 10 years ago. So I think it is incumbent upon us all as stakeholders in this game to demand more of our leaders, to demand like this sort of character that is commensurate with the character that we, value in players. I think you have to be able to be an appropriate steward of a team or a league or a union constituency. I think you have to be able to handle tons of practical matters, but I also think you have to be able to lead with some level of moral compass and heart too, and I think that's been missing.
Katie, let's stay on that NHLPA subject just for a brief moment here. What do you think the investigation will lead to, and do we see more players taking an active role? We heard Adam Lowry speak openly about it here. We know the Bruins as a team watch this as a educational tool. Do you see the players taking a little bit of a lead in terms of the charge as well?
I hope so. I think that's the easiest way to effectuate change is if the players are, involved and engaged and, committed to seeing the process through and hold people in positions of power accountable. I really appreciated what, Wayne Simmons said the other day. I thought that to me was real leadership, what he said. Robin Lehner has been great, I think, about being very candid in his comments and speaking out when it's difficult to. And so I appreciate that when players are willing to take that step. I would hope and I would imagine that those conversations are being had internally amongst players and that we'll see more of them in the public sphere, especially, in wake of this investigation. We will see what it unearths.
Katie, you'd mentioned off the top of the interview that you were taking some time to process the Kevin Cheveldayoff Mark Chipman presser. What are your takeaways?
Yeah, so very different in tone from like the Gary Bettman press conference, obviously, and thank God for that. But and I said that sort of the things that I appreciated about what Mark Chipman displayed, like a level of knowledge, awareness, education, and research and outreach already, and that he pledged, to be part of the solution. Those are all great things. I appreciated that he talked about how sexual abuse is not self-contained, that it's more than just hockey, it's a workplace issue. I'm at the point though, like where I do believe, actions mean more than words. And I think the thing that I keep wrestling with Kevin Cheveldayoff is there did seem to be some very sincere emotion there in terms of like contrition and remorse. It would have resonated much differently for me had it come a lot sooner. And when I say that, I mean, this Jenner and Black report like forced things out into the open. And I think it has put the onus on people who were kind of principals in this situation to discuss their role. And the thing that keeps I keep coming back to is that statement he released in the summer. And he talked about that at the press conference and he was asked about it. And, I think it technically was accurate, but for me, it defied the spirit of truth. And I think when you do that, you lose some credibility, and you have to earn that back, and so you earn that back, I think, from actions and not from words. But that was a little bit difficult for me to reconcile with some of the emotions and some of the things that he said. And again, I go back to, he talked about how the things that he heard in the meeting, even if he did not hear the totality of what everyone else did, he described them both as shocking and serious. And so I guess I'm just, again, wondering why there wasn't more curiosity to learn more about the situation or learn more and investigate more about how it might be impacting this young man in their organization. And, he said basically, according to what he knew, it was like sexual harassment, not sexual assault. And I guess my follow-up question to him would be like, how do you think you should handle a situation of sexual harassment, which is also very serious? And I hope it's treated accordingly. So I think that question or that press conference maybe left me with more questions than answers. And I don't think we'll really get answers until we see whether words are converted into action.
How do the Jets ensure that those actions are, followed through on, Katie, essentially? And I think Sheldon Kennedy used the words lip service with Paul Friesen here. You got to ensure that it's not just lip service.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's engaging everyone in the process. And so, like, making sure that it's not just talking to your hockey team, but talking to everyone who works for your organization. Um, Empowering bystanders is great, but it's hard to do unless you can also provide bystanders like whistleblowing protection. So that's, something that you kind of have to build into the scaffolding of, um, sort of reporting structures and infrastructures and support systems. So I think, education, outreach, a real sense of collective, and that, decision making when it comes to this serious stuff has to be sort of more collaborative rather than top down. I think when you see organizations that are highly stratified that in hierarchical, I think there's a less of a willingness to speak up. We're in organizations that are more collaborative and seek input from people sort of from all over the organization. I think you see people more willing to speak up and be honest about things that concern them.
Katie, you had said in your response before that press conference to a degree left you with, more questions than answers. I don't want to take away from the work that you're going to be doing, great work that you're already doing. What are some of those questions that you have?
Some of the questions that I have. How can we be sure it'll be handled differently in the future? What sort of protections and safeguards are going to be put in place to deal with it in the future? I don't think, I think it's great when people say we don't want this to ever happen again. But the reality is like sexual abuse and sexual predators are a reality. And it's knowing how to effectively like deal with them and to confront difficult situations that's important. I mean, prevention is great too, and is necessary. But I think the failure here, the true like failure here, was in the response to very sensitive disclosures. So I think the questions that I have are largely related to what are they willing to do in the future to make sure that their actions meet their words.
What else can reporters do to kind of keep the feet to the fire on this issue in general, Katie?
I always when a story like this comes out, like I always have people reach out about either related stories or unrelated stories, but kind of in the same topic matter. And, my DMs are open and my email is public for that reason. And just, I always tell people to just kind of keep your eyes and ears open at a time like this. I think it's been an emotional week for everyone. And, sexual abuse is pervasive, and it probably impacts more people than we're all aware of. And so to just like really be vigilant about how people around you are feeling right now. And, everyone's going through a battle that you don't know anything about. Right. And to just be kind of aware of that and how this might impact people in different ways, and to just, be willing to be a safe person, a sanctuary, a safe haven for people that might, want to talk about something that they've kept secret for a long time or kept silent about.
Katie, you had talked about the idea of that feeling of we want to make sure this never ever happens again. But to your point, this is a reality, and it is going to happen again. You can say that, but I think it was Rick. I don't want to put words in his mouth. I think it was Rick Westhead who said after that press conference, that's a naive take. It is going to happen again. You have to go through the steps of putting into place the things that you'll do once that happens. When you dig into this kind of stuff, this awful topic of sexual harassment and sexual assault, you learn certain things. And one of those is like the idea that a 6'4" man can't be victimized by someone who's 5'10". We learn through that there's power imbalances that exist, and these are the things that are exploited. This is how that happens. Knowing all the stuff that when you do that and you report and you get this mountain of people asking these making these same suggestions over and over again that are wrong, how taxing is that to kind of be fighting those same battles over and over and over again by people who have either not educated themselves or are willfully ignorant or are refusing to educate themselves?
Yeah, I mean it's frustrating, and it's actively harmful to certain survivors and victims in ways too, right? I've seen people ask that question about like size differential, which not only sort of obfuscates or ignores the idea of power imbalance, but there's a pretty prominent understood physiological response called tonic immobility, which is basically like we're taught about fight or flight responses. But sometimes when your body and mind are under extreme duress and stress and fear, a fear mechanism is you freeze. And that's really, really exceptionally common. And so it is frustrating when people haven't really like put the time in to educate themselves. I guess I often assume people are making those like arguments or stupid comments in bad faith, because I think they often are. Um, but it's a good opportunity to educate people sometimes when you feel like they are being sincere about learning more. And I think it's a good time to debunk some of those more pervasive, cloying theories out there that can, really, really cloud what's truly happening here.
Katie, Mark Shipman referenced the work that True North has done on Project 11 and mental health awareness in light of what happened with Rick Rippon. What would a program like that look like when it comes to sexual assault and awareness?
I think one of the biggest things would probably be establishing a sense of community. Um, there are two things that like really hit home for me with that Kyle Beach interview last Wednesday.
Mm.
One, and I think this is probably universal, like when he apologized to that Michigan teen, like if you were not crying at that point, like I don't know how that's possible. I mean that really truly broke me. But the other thing that I was not surprised about, but it's hard every time you hear, is just how alone he felt. And that's one of the most insidious byproducts of abuse, is like the isolation. And I think there are so many people who sit with just this like very, very heavy thing, alone, afraid to share it. And it can fester and it can manifest in some really difficult ways. And so I think if you build, a level of community and support and solidarity among victims and survivors, that's a really, really healthy, productive way to, create a level of support for those people.
Katie, I like you. I absolutely broke at that moment of when he talked about and apologized, and you thought about him carrying all the weight that he felt that he needed to carry for himself, and yet felt that he let other people down in the process. I just thought that was, I thought it was a game changer. And I guess the one thing that we do know, we've seen it from Sheldon Kennedy, we've seen it from survivors. There's power in coming forward. And it helps other people in those situations. But I don't know if in this situation or other situations that you've dealt with at all, you've been privy to people going through that process of getting to the point where they are deciding whether or not they are going to identify themselves, and whether you could kind of take us through the fear that they go through of getting to that point where they rip open the curtains and show, parts of themselves that no one ever has to.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I've gone through with people several different times over the course of, several different stories, and it is a really difficult choice. And I never push someone one way or the other because it's such a personal choice. What I try to do is if they decide, I try to lay out like sort of pros and cons. But I do believe it's our job as journalists to give them like worst case scenarios, which is and to be realistic, to say, your name like this will live on the internet. Your kids will read this. You will have there are like, I mean, there's just like such a wide array of things that happen after you come forward publicly, many of them positive, mind you, some that are negative. Like I always tell people, like, there are going to be some trolls and some shitty people that say awful things, and I wish that weren't the case, but I wouldn't be it would be doing a disservice if I'm not warning you about that. Like, you have to be able to steel your resolve to know that there are just awful people out there that are just willing to tear you down when you are showing this intense level of courage. But one of the things that I always kind of not warn people about, but try to prepare them for, is even if the response you get is like 99% positive, when you come forward as a survivor of sexual abuse, it's so common that people, like random people that you don't know, or people that you do know and had no idea that they were impacted by this personal topic, they're going to disclose to you. And you can be like very appreciative and grateful for that level of trust in their disclosure. But it's really overwhelming. I mean, like, I always tell people, you're not a mental health professional, you're not a trained psychologist. It's okay if you need to like draw a boundary and, not sort of be, kind of open and available for everyone to unload their trauma onto you, because sometimes that happens, and it doesn't even come from a bad place. It comes from a place of, wanting to share and connect and tell someone how much they inspired them to do the same, but it can be really overwhelming. And I know that's really difficult for a lot of survivors. So I do always try to prepare them and try to give them an idea of, ways that they can thank someone, but also like protect their own peace and draw healthy boundaries for themselves.
Katie, one other one for me. I mean, Kevin Cheveldayoff spoke about maybe being open to a conversation with Kyle Beach. If that conversation were to happen, what kind of impact could it have on this process?
I mean, I think, I think huge. I don't want to speak for Kyle here. But what I will say is, I think I hope that coming forward has helped like advance him on his own personal journey toward healing, and everyone's is different. But I do think, confronting certain things can be cathartic. I think having those like personal conversations and connections to explain how you're feeling, and to have that sort of like, nonverbal even exchange of emotions is really healthy. I support Kyle, whatever he wants to do in terms of having that conversation or not. But I think people would be surprised. I think a lot of times people assume that when a victim or a survivor is involved in civil litigation, that it is about money. And so often it is the non-monetary items that are so much more important, and that actually, become real things that they fight for in litigation. And, I'll give you sort of an easy anecdote about this, but, when I was covering the Larry Nassar case and with MSU and USA Gymnastics, and they were going through settlement talks, they got pretty contentious, and it was not over the money. It was over the fact that the gymnasts wanted safeguards to ensure the safety for future gymnasts. They wanted pledges and commitments to a full, sort of unvarnished, unfiltered investigation that would be transparent to the public. And they wanted, and this is, again, stunning in its simplicity, but like almost universal, they wanted an apology. And so sometimes it is something so basic and simple that it like just kind of shocks you. But I think an apology is really meaningful. And I think I suspect that's part of why Kyle Beach apologizing to that young man in Michigan was so impactful, because I don't think there's any one of us that thinks he should has anything to apologize for. But I think it was such a stark contrast because there was none of that level of like humility or accountability or just apology to Kyle Beach.
Katie, I don't want to keep you trapped in this conversation. I don't know how much time you have. So if you need to get out, like scratch your forehead or give Ken some kind of sign that you need to pop out of here. There was some other topics I wanted to discuss with you, though. I don't know if you saw the movie Spotlight. It's one of those movies that you look at and you're proud to be a journalist. One of the interesting parts about that is, the very people who blow the lid off the Catholic Church sex scandal are the people who failed to do so when given adequate heads up to do so years before, right? So there's been, and we have open conversations with our fans in this forum, and there's been questions about the media's role in this and how much we may have succeeded or failed in this, or in the Northern Michigan University, all these places that you covered these stories. If you're comfortable going there, how are we doing as media? How often are we falling down? How often are we achieving the job that we should be achieving of helping to protect the powerless against the powerful?
I think, there is so much in, if you're an investigative reporter, which I am, like, there's so much there's so much content to work with. Like, I don't have enough hours in the day to pursue everything that I want into the degree of satisfaction that I want to the point that it really like takes a real toll. It really weighs on me. And I wish there was more interest right now in investigative journalism. But, I think that's a tough question. I think people feel very uncomfortable working on things that they don't understand. So for instance, like, I suck at math. I'm not very good at numbers. So like analytics, I'm not someone that like dismisses their importance. They're intimidating to me because I don't understand them very well. And I think probably the same thing is true about like certain sort of really important social issues, like, sexual abuse, gendered violence, substance abuse, head trauma, trauma in general. And so I always try to think of it like how I do my job as is, being able to talk about this stuff is almost like a bit of a muscle that you have to continue to work. And you do it often enough that you strengthen that muscle and you become more comfortable using it. And, if you don't use that muscle, it will atrophy. So I think the more we start having these conversations within the mainstream media, the more we recognize the importance. And I think the more incremental gains we will have as a collective. But, the media is not a monolith. I mean, we all work for different outlets and different companies, and it's different everywhere. But I think this story, especially because of Rick's contributions, have shown the importance of investigative journalism, I hope.
I wholeheartedly agree. I always say, I watch that Spotlight movie. I watch All the President's Men, and I get this crazy feeling of pride in my industry when I see those movies and the power that has been displayed in real life in the past. And that I got that exact same feeling from Rick Westhead's work here. I'm just so proud of what he's done. I reached out to him afterwards to tell him as much, and he got back to me. I know he's on the other side of the competition here in Canada, but I'll tell you, there's nothing that we should hold back on in showing praise towards the work that he's done in this situation.
Absolutely. And Rick's I guess technically a competitor of mine, but I just have the utmost respect and affinity for him, and he's a hell of a competitor, and he pushes all of us to do better. And he's an even better person. I'm lucky to also call him a friend.
Yeah.
Katie, we said the same thing to Frank. We hope you can come back with us later in the year where we get down.
Sorry, Ken, I just have one more I wanted to ask, if that's okay, Katie. I only bring this up because you brought it up earlier in the conversation. You talked about Kevin Cheveldayoff and earning it back, and I was wondering, the fact that he's, one of 7 men in that room that, potentially had information, varying degrees of information, but information that they could have potentially used to affect this situation. Being that he's the one of the 7 men that got out of that room, and that, like you'd said, because of how it was handled early on, I think there's always going to be skeptics to Kevin Cheveldayoff, regardless of, going forward. There's going to be people who will question his role in this. Do you think he owes it to the skeptics to lead on this issue going forward in terms of earning it back, as you'd said?
I mean, I think he owes it to people beyond the skeptics. I mean, I think he owes it to himself. I think he owes it to Kyle Beach. I think he owes it to the people in his organization, the players in his league. But that's not just on Kevin Cheveldayoff. I mean, we have to all sort of feel a collective buy-in in protecting the greater workplace, or the greater sort of hockey landscape and the people within it. So I don't think this is about sort of singling out one person versus another. I hope everyone reflects on this situation and prepares themselves for how they would handle a situation and in the way that they would want to be treated if they were in Kyle Beach's shoes.
Well said.
Tremendous insight, Katie. And yeah, well, we're going to have you back to do, the core of this program generally is to shine a light on the story behind the story and the behind the storytellers. And we want to get into how, your career, I got to know you when you were a beat writer on the New York Islanders, but we want to talk about how you got into the investigative side as well, and some of those other topics. But we know obviously this is a subject that is of the utmost importance, and that's why we had you here to join us here today. It was great to have you with us, and we look forward to talking to you again down the road.
Okay, sounds great, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Katie. Ken, I don't know that there's a lot to say beyond what she'd said there. Absolutely phenomenal job. I will say this. I wanted to address this. Like I said, our chat room, we don't really bring it into these shows as much, but we do like to see the healthy conversations happening there. We're never trying to suppress debate. We like to err on the side of allowing debate. I had kicked someone out of the chat room earlier on today. There was, and the thing that did it for me was essentially there was victim blaming going on directed towards Kyle Beach. There's no place for that. We're not interested in it. I thought it was ludicrous. I thought it was disgusting. It's not welcome. If you want to debate certain issues, you can do so without attacking other people. That was not happening. And there is no place for trying to lay any of the blame in this situation on Kyle Beach, who I think the vast majority of us should be able to acknowledge has, created a lot of change here, at a lot of personal through a lot of personal suffering. So I just wanted to touch on that. Anything that you have to say before we head out, Ken?
No, I think Katie was a great person to have to talk about this, and she was able to help. I mean, part of the reason we wanted to have her on was just to educate our audience, but to help educate ourselves as we all try to get better as journalists, as we pursue these types of stories, and make sure that there are things happening moving forward to ensure that we have a role to play too. And like as Katie said, as stewards of the sport that we love so much, and look forward to continuing that learning process. And we thank Katie for her immense contribution on that front here today.
Yeah, I wanted to say that. I wanted to touch on that topic of the media and the media's role. It was a question that comes directly from our audience. I wanted to say to our audience, thank you for in the process of us doing this and covering this, there's been many attempts to hold us to account in the media in this, and I for one, I welcome those those challenges. That's the way it should be. Someone had made a comment on our last show about, if the critical eye that we have turned on this situation was turned towards us, how would we feel about it? I feel that is exactly what should happen. The critical eye, I do my job and we should all do our job. I feel, Ken, feeling that the critical eye is on us and we should be watched, because our job is to try and gain information and relay it to the public, to allow the public to make up their mind, or to at least have the ability to learn about and make things up. So in doing so, yeah, we work for certain organizations, but in the end, the way I feel is if you're a journalist, your boss is the public that you're trying to get that information out to, which means they're more than welcome and should be critical of your work when it's needed. And we thank you, our audience, for being that for us and being respectful in the process. I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you so much, everybody. And a huge thank you to Katie Strang, who is absolutely phenomenal. We were lucky to have her on. We'll be back next week. Don't have the show queued up. It's going to be a little bit different next week, though, back to kind of more of the normal programming that you see from the long form Kenny and Renny's. So I really appreciate everyone who took part in this, and thank you. And we hope to see you back next week. Other than that, post-game Kenny and Renny after the Winnipeg Jets take on the Chicago Blackhawks on Friday. Thank you so much, everybody.